Hey everyone. So I wanted to talk about the current state of the economy, what people are doing, and what you can do in order to be in the top 20 to 30% of people who are actually going to make it out of this and not really feel the effects of the economy's pressure. So currently, before we talk about right now, let's talk about what's happened in the last 2 to 3 years. In the last 2 to 3 years, we've had low interest rates, especially coming out of 2019, which has bolstered the economy, bolstered new business, bolstered people's paychecks. People demanded more money. People demanded better jobs. People demanded to work from home. People demanded higher wages. People demanded more time off. People quiet quitted. What is quiet quitting? Quiet quitting is bouncing from a new job to another job without giving the 2 weeks, without letting your manager know. Basically, training for another job while working at another job. Anything of that sort of nature was considered quiet quitting. People were basically taking matters into their own hand, taking their financial future into their own hand, going on vacation, spending. When COVID came, it shut everything down. You could not go out anymore, but you were still working. You couldn't go to the bars. You couldn't spend money. All you could do was really shop on Amazon, and Amazon made more money than they ever did, ever in their history during COVID. What came out of that? Well, people were bundled up, stayed home, realized they didn't really like the person that they were living with, and they decided that they would go and get their own place. They would rent, they would buy a home. So you saw a rush in housing demand. You saw people wanting to move out and get their own stuff. And with that, with the coupling of interest rates being so low, we saw an inflated economy, especially with government stimulus, with people getting free money, people making more money than they ever did in COVID to not work and stay home. They were making just as much money as I was fresh out of college to stay home and not work. And I was working every day, probably 50 hours a week. So with that being said, we had a lot of people taking advantage of the economy that we were in. And that led to the excess spending that we have today. So now that debt is more expensive and we have a job market that is on shaky water, how are we going to navigate in this new environment that we find ourselves in? Well, the way some people are managing now is that the U.S. Census Bureau has come out with a report that the uptick in credit card debt has now went up about 13.2%. And the demand for a refinance has gone down by over 82%, affecting loan originators who may have made $100,000 last year are now making $13,800. So that type of drastic pay cut, that type of drastic effect on your budget will affect most people. So coming out of 2022, the U.S. Census Bureau had stated that Americans had saved the most money ever in their history. But now coming into 2023, we are spending more money than we have ever spent in American history. So we can see the discorrelation between the two and how that is going to affect people moving forward with a more tightened economy, with debt being more expensive and everything being a lot more expensive to buy in this inflated economy. In December, inflation was at 6.2%, so a lot lower than it was previous months. However, 6.2% is still a lot higher than what the Fed would like, which their target goal is still 2%. And the Fed has already stated that they do not foresee that they will get to 2% inflation numbers in 2023. So they are trying to have a prolonged high short-term interest rates in order to help get interest rates, inflation back down to 2% in the future. Some people are skeptical that inflation will never be back at 2%, or at least within the next 5 years, it will not be back at 2%. And that the Fed is basically going to cripple the economy with short-term interest rates being so high rather than lowering it before that happens. So we've already experienced a lot of layoffs within the job market, whether it be for mortgages, whether it be for certain big businesses like Tide dry cleaners in certain markets are shutting down, right? So with that being said, people spending, and honestly, they may just be buying the same things that they've always bought. But now, because the cost of food, the cost of services are so much higher, more than 10% higher, that is going to affect their budget by that same amount, that same percentage. So even if they're just buying the same necessities that they've always had, they're no longer able to save the difference, and they need to tack on some of those expenses onto a card that they're unable to pay, or they must carry that debt balance over to pay next month. Because of that, we're going to see more debt in our economy from consumer spending. We're going to see less people able to afford that debt because credit card rates have actually gone up within this economy because they foresee less people being able to afford to pay their credit card payments, and therefore they're going to subsidize that by tacking it onto those who will pay. And so now you're going to see 28% rates on credit cards and even higher rates on credit cards.